In the late 1990s, a major international financial institution hired a brilliant, hyper-charismatic executive named John to stabilize a failing corporate division. On paper, John was an absolute savior. He possessed an elite education, an immaculate wardrobe, and an unshakable, calm confidence that instantly put boardrooms at ease. Within 6 months of managing his corporate workspace, the company's short-term profits soared, and senior leadership hailed him as a visionary. But beneath that flawless, professional veneer lay a terrifying, predatory reality. While executives applauded his numbers, the employees working directly beneath John were quietly entering a state of severe psychological trauma and emotional exhaustion. John was not a visionary. He was a clinically textbook, high-functioning corporate psychopath. Over a 3-year period, he systematically dismantled the company's internal structure, fabricated data, executed brutal character assassinations, and drove dozens of loyal employees into permanent career burnout. This real-world case study exposed a chilling vulnerability built directly into modern social hierarchies. It proved that the exact traits our culture rewards in high-stakes environments, ruthless ambition, absolute detachment, and performative charm, are the identical cloaks used by clinical predators to camouflage their malice, completely blinding the crowd to a structural execution happening right before their eyes. This profound corporate hijack is driven by a psychological mechanism known as psychopathic camouflage, operating through a structure called the mask of sanity. Originally defined by psychiatrist Hervey Cleckley, this framework describes how a clinically antisocial individual can perfectly replicate the appearance of normal human emotion without experiencing a single drop of genuine empathy, guilt, or remorse. To the conscious ego of the ordinary observer, we expect a predator to look chaotic, aggressive, or obviously corrupt. But the high-functioning corporate psychopath operates on a completely different predatory directive. Their subconscious views human interactions strictly as a zero-sum game of dominance and resource extraction. They use their intellect to construct a flawless imitation of warmth, high integrity, and team loyalty. They don't have a conscience. They have a calculated performance tracking engine. They treat your trust, your professionalism, and your compliance as raw tools to be manipulated, using their manufactured charm as a psychological shield to secure total authority while keeping their true hollow nature completely hidden from the room. To see why this performative mask is so absolute, we must look at the neurobiology of the psychopathic brain and the empathy processing networks. When modern neuroscientists place high-functioning psychopaths inside functional brain scanners and expose them to images of human distress, pain, or social violation, they observe an extraordinary neural detachment. In a normal brain, witnessing another person's suffering triggers an immediate, visceral activation inside the amygdala and the anterior insula, the neural networks responsible for processing somatic empathy and social pain. But in the psychopathic brain, these structures remain completely dark and inactive. Conversely, their orbital prefrontal cortex and cognitive control networks light up with high intensity. In a very literal sense, their biology pulls the plug on emotional resonance. They do not feel the world. They coldly calculate it. They possess an elite capacity for cognitive empathy, meaning they can logically understand exactly what buttons to push to manipulate your emotions, while remaining completely immune to the psychological damage they inflict on your nervous system. When a corporate psychopath begins targeting an environment, the victim's subconscious minds deploy an automated defensive maneuver known as the normalcy bias fallacy. This is a psychological shield where an ordinary, empathetic individual observes blatant signs of cruelty, lying, or sabotage, but chooses to treat them as minor misunderstandings or temporary high-stress reactions. The human ego cannot handle the terrifying, destabilizing reality of standing in a room with a person who possesses absolutely no moral baseline. To protect your pride from the realization that you are dealing with a clinical predator, Your mind performs a catastrophic rationalization of their behavior. It tells a comforting story. Surely they wouldn't lie about something so obvious. Surely they have the company's best interest at heart. Or perhaps I am simply misinterpreting their intense management style. Notice how the mind uses your own capacity for decency to shield you from the reality of their malice. This process happens entirely beneath your conscious awareness, leaving you completely blind to an unfolding crisis simply to maintain an illusion of a safe, rational environment. The primary weapon a corporate psychopath uses to execute their systemic takeover is a process called strategic triangulation and division. During his time at the firm, John did not confront his detractors openly. He used the digital architecture of his computer workspace to construct an intricate web of isolated communication. He would privately approach a senior executive and whisper subtle, manufactured doubts about a manager's competence. Hours later, he would approach that exact manager, showering them with false praise while claiming that the executive was secretly plotting to replace them. This behavior is calculated with absolute precision to destroy corporate unity. The clash between these artificial narratives creates severe cognitive dissonance and widespread paranoia across the department. The employees stop sharing data and begin isolating themselves to protect their positions, entirely blind to the reality that the leader is using their division as an emotional shield to ensure nobody can ever unite to audit his fraudulent reports, choosing the safety of silent compliance today over the risk of collective exposure tomorrow. Alongside strategic triangulation, the predatory executive utilizes a secondary, highly passive filter known as managing upwards validation. While John was systematically terrorizing his subordinates, stripping them of credit, and executing silent discards on anyone who questioned his logic, his behavior toward senior leadership was a masterclass in absolute alignment and flattery. He studied the egos, the insecurities, and the personal desires of the board members, transforming himself into the perfect echo of their corporate ambitions. This selective filter ensures that the leadership's prefrontal cortex is completely taken offline by confirmation bias. When exhausted employees finally gather the courage to report the abuse, the board actively blocks out the data, categorizing the complaints as jealousy, low work ethic, or an inability to handle high-stakes pressure. Managing upwards transforms the institutional hierarchy into a blank space where the predator is completely untouchable, allowing them to participate in systemic workplace cruelty while remaining completely cloaked in the absolute protection of the company's highest authorities. These abstract biological filters manifest daily in devastating real-world loops, the most common of which is the trap of the gaslit department. This is the precise reason why an entire office of highly intelligent, experienced professionals can witness blatant corporate corruption yet remain completely frozen in passivity for years. When a psychopath controls the narrative, they don't just tell a lie, they alter the psychological baseline of the environment. If an employee points out a clear data discrepancy in a meeting, John would respond with absolute unyielding calmness, suggesting that the employee was simply confused, stressed, or lacking the full context. He would look around the room, and because the other colleagues were trapped in pluralistic ignorance, staying silent to protect their own careers, the dissenter's brain would experience a massive survival panic. They would begin doubting their own memory and spatial reasoning. The organization voluntarily surrenders its collective intelligence, sliding down a slope of systemic failure, simply because its members choose to deny the plain truth of their eyes to conform to a frozen crowd. We see this exact same self-sabotage playing out through the pattern of the sacrificial scapegoat discard. When a high-functioning predator realizes that a major operational error or financial fraud is about to be exposed inside their computer workspace, their predictive tracking engine executes a swift defensive maneuver to protect their position. They do not take responsibility. They select a highly dedicated, empathetic employee who has access to the data and transform them into the ultimate shield. Through a series of manufactured emails, altered timestamps, and quiet whispers behind closed boardroom doors, the psychopath shifts the entire weight of the catastrophe onto the innocent target. The victim is suddenly hit with a brutal, unexpected termination or a public investigation, leaving them in a state of absolute psychological shock and neurochemical trauma. The crowd looks at the documentation, accepts the fabricated narrative, and closes the case, entirely blind to the reality that the true predator is sitting calmly at his desk, completely shielded from the fallout, preparing his next mask for the next corporate cycle. When this collective blindness and psychopathic camouflage scales up from a corporate department to a societal level, it produces the highly destructive phenomenon of institutional decay and pathocracy. A pathocracy is a system or civilization where a small minority of clinically antisocial individuals successfully seize the control levers of government, industry, and media culture. Because ordinary citizens are wired for social conformity and look to authority figures for survival cues, they stop evaluating laws and social policies based on objective logic or data. Instead, they begin evaluating them solely based on whether they match the prevailing orthodoxy of the dominant tribe. Mass compliance turns a population into a synchronized, unthinking herd that will gladly enforce collective cruelty and burn down its own freedom simply to maintain an illusion of tribal safety. A society does not collapse because it is overrun by external monsters. It slides into tyranny because moral citizens choose to become passive echoes of a loud, psychopathic narrative, violently attacking any independent thinker who tries to expose the mask. The true danger of interacting with a high-functioning boardroom predator is that it constructs a perfectly closed, self-fulfilling cognitive loop that entirely blinds you to your own loss of personal sovereignty. The cycle begins the moment you accept their performative charm and ignore your initial gut instinct of internal discomfort. This environment creates immediate subconscious pressure to align with their authority, forcing your brain to reduce activity in its self-reflective and critical processing networks. Because your internal boundaries are lowered by your desire to succeed, you choose compliance, repeating their excuses or participating in the exclusion of a targeted coworker. To clear the immediate wave of guilt, your mind instantly deploys normalcy bias validation and rationalization, rewriting the event to convince your conscious ego that the leader must be right. This failure to stand for your own independent truth is then used by your predictive engine as a new acceptable baseline for the future. The loop closes perfectly, strengthening the neural pathways of moral blindness until you are a passive puppet keeping the delusion alive. Dismantling this matrix of psychopathic camouflage requires a rare, aggressive practice known as radical data documentation. You cannot defeat a high-functioning predator by engaging in emotional arguments, offering more patience, or appealing to their non-existent conscience. Your brain's predictive engine demands hard, unyielding data points of objective reality to break the spell of their gaslighting. This reprogramming begins by completely removing your emotional investment from their performance. The next time you find yourself in an environment where a narrative feels wrong, or a fact is being distorted, do not look to the crowd for validation. Recognize that your internal confusion is your amygdala firing a compliance alarm under the pressure of their charm. Force your conscious mind to override the freeze, document every communication, save every physical email on your desktop, and anchor your awareness strictly to verifiable, written facts. When the moment for confrontation arrives, present your objective data with absolute, unyielding calmness and clarity. By refusing to engage with their emotional bait, you break the pluralistic ignorance of the room, exposing the structural fraud and reclaiming your mind. Stripping away the mask of a high-functioning predator and standing firmly for your objective truth is an act of supreme psychological heroism, because it forces you to face the raw neural pain of corporate isolation, public visibility, and targeted retaliation. Your brain will fight this process at every single turn, desperately screaming at you to keep your head down, follow the herd, and accept the comfortable shared illusions of the boardroom simply to keep your ego safe in the pack. But now that you know the anatomy of the trap, now that you understand how your subconscious mind uses psychopathic camouflage, normalcy bias, and strategic triangulation to turn you into an unthinking echo, the mask has lost its lock over your consciousness. You can choose to step out of the delusion and view your workspace with absolute unyielding clarity. This navigation of your subconscious architecture is a lifelong education, and your brain utilizes dozens of other invisible neural mechanisms every single day to dictate your choices and trap you on autopilot without your consent. If you are ready to shatter the rest of these hidden mental loops, discover how your mind fakes reality, and unlock the true mechanisms of your subconscious, click on the playlist appearing on your screen right now. We have built an entire archive of long-form case studies and psychological deep dives designed explicitly to help you look past the self-delusions of your ego. Click through, explore the library, and take absolute control of your psychology.